Hello, literary scholars. In this video, I want to talk about the essay prompt. But before that, I'm jumping back to 13.7 about literary criticism. And I think this is the best way I can articulate it, is that exploring a topic of literary criticism can help readers understand the various ways literature can matter. So really chew on that. And there's two different types of literary criticism. There's this idea of determining the merit of where a short story, in this case, fits in the canon, or this idea of interpretive criticism. So I would think that most of you are going to focus on this kind of interpretive criticism. So with that said, let's look at the essay prompt. So if you've explored the different pages in week 13, I have different tools in there that are going to help you just think about argumentation, whether it's inductive, deductive, what a writer relies on in terms of assumptions. You can look at ethos, pathos, and logos. Then I have a series of 6 different literary criticisms. You're going to pick one that kind of floats your boat in association with a short story. So basically, this is what we've been talking about, the variety of ways writers have been engaging the human experience. And I've been really pushing students away from this idea, especially since we're looking at literature through the Black lens, is this idea of racism and discrimination, right? And really we've looked at theme. And I would argue all 20 poems that we looked at talked about inspiration, some sort of motivation. So with that kind of in context, think about, and what the CBL's articulated. So now what your task is, you're going to pick one of those 6 criticisms, and you're going to make an argument about a short story that we have read. So you can use one of the 2 that you had a shared theme when we did the fiction essay, or you can pick something different. And then basically what you're going to do is you're going to make an argument, and you're going to use all the tools. You're going to use that literary criticism. You're going to use some outside sources and really dive into the text of your story and how it proves your argument. So you're like, what the hell? So basically, this is kind of what you're going to begin with, right? Is you want to think about what short story you want to work with, maybe simultaneously thinking about what lens you want to use. So since I've been using kind of the lynching of Jude Benson and On Being Crazy as kind of my model, maybe that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the short story that I want to use is the lynching of Jude Benson, right? Then I'm thinking about what critical lens. Maybe I want to do the psychoanalytical and look at it from a psychological perspective. Because I'm thinking about literary criticism as how is this interpretive, but how is this also for me, because I'm also curious why we started with that short story, why we listened to the audio, why many of my classmates thought that it was just this idea how horrific a lynching was, but why did George give this to us? And really this deeper level of why he was been talking about all semester. I know I'm talking about myself in the third person, but follow me. This idea of moving away from racism, moving away from discrimination. Yes, lynchings are horrific, but I'm going to make this argument through this psychoanalytical lens of what the impact was on the reader, to really unpack the depths that Dunbar was looking at. So then I'm going to analyze the story through this lens, and I want to make an argument. That's going to be my thesis. I'm going to say something about how the lynching of Jude Benson does a deep dive into this psychoanalytical lens about the mindset of Americans when it came to the inequality and relying on lynching as a form of entertainment and justice or something like that, right? So that's just what I'm just thinking as I'm reading this prompt, I'm thinking about. But then I'm really going to have to go back and reread this and really think about some of the things. Maybe you want to go back and look at some of your notes if you printed out all the short stories. Go back and look at some of your discussion posts that you had with yourself and with your classmates on some of these short stories. If you want to use one of the stories that you did for your fiction, you're going to unpack it differently. You're going to attack it differently. Maybe you want to revisit one of the short stories that you did for your fiction paper. Maybe there's something else that floats your boat. Maybe you want to look at maybe you might want to look at everyday use and feminism, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things you can look at. But basically, this is what you're going to do, is you want to think about drawing a conclusion about what we learn, right? This whole idea of what is this impact through this literary criticism. So that's really the gist of what you're going to be doing. So it's basically revisiting a short story that you already read, and it could be a short story that you use for the fiction paper, but you're applying these argumentative tools that I have outlined here in this module. Maybe I'm going to look at the ethos, pathos, and logos. I think Dunbar was making an inductive argument, and he did that purposefully. And I'm going to articulate that in my paper. And then once again, criteria for success. Remember, you're always writing for a skeptical, engaged reader who cares what you have to say but not convinced. Here's kind of the page limit. And then one of the key things, and I think especially when I talked with folks about their fiction paper, and obviously you just submitted your poetry paper, is that you want to lean on the short story. You want to use the lines in the short story to pick at your argument. You want to use the elements of the literary criticism. So in this case, I'm using the psychoanalytical. So I'm going to focus on that one. Also, you're going to use 2 sources from the LMC database. And once again, you have the CBLs, you have everything within Canvas to look at. And most importantly, you have that lens. And definitely you want to identify the lens and maybe why. And then the key thing here is and if you notice I bolded this, right? Is this idea of what are you arguing? So if I'm arguing this idea of the lynching of Jude Benson through this psychoanalytical lens, is I'm going to look at the different psyches. I'm going to look at maybe some of the ideas that I talk about in that lens about Freud, and maybe what the psyche was of the country, what the psyche was of Dunbar, and why he gave the doctor so much agency, and why the doctor went through this character conflict, right? Because I'm building on all my skills that I learned when I did my fiction paper. And I'm going to explain my thinking. What does that mean? Definitely what it means is really unpacking why I'm making this argument that this short story is articulating this psychoanalytical perspective that's connecting to an inductive that is playing on the reader's pathos, which is the emotion. And maybe really trying to look at lynching in America at this time from a deeper psychological perspective, and not about it's a horrific crime or it's injustice or it's racist or it's discrimination. Hell no. This deeper level thinking. Once again, using all your tools. And then, so folks, this paper is due the last day of the semester. And I will turn it on starting week 16. So you have the remainder of the semester to work on it. So the key thing is to maximize your time, start thinking, engage in the discussion with your classmates, start poking around the databases, and show me your best work. Happy exploring, folks.